strategy, particularly investing in vulnerable groups. We have strengthened the National Health Insurance Fund by increasing service delivery centers, increased the supply of medicines, and implemented free, equitable, and quality primary and secondary education for all. Regions in the country, and the number of fully fledged universities and university colleges increased from 1 in 1961 to 52 this year, 2023, and integrated digital technology in the education system, involving distribution of tablets to school teachers to facilitate digital education and the institution of online school registration system. With regard to the health sector, infant and under 5 mortality declined from 67 deaths per 1,000 live births in 2015 to 43 per 1,000 live births in 2022. The number of persons with health insurance cover increased by 30%, from 3.5 million in 2016 to nearly 5 million in 2021. Health facilities have a core set of essential medicines available and affordable on a sustainable basis, increased to 78% in 2022 compared to a mere 1% in 2015. On HIV/AIDS, Tanzania is now attaining epidemic control and achieving fast track and 99 to 99 targets. Currently, 89.7% of people living with HIV know their status, of which 99% of them are on ARVs and 96% of them have suppressed HIV viral load to an undetectable level. And consequently, life expectancy in Tanzania increased from 60 years in 2010 to 66 years in 2022. Other milestones worth noting include improved food security, which reversed in trends in all forms of malnutrition for children. The prevalence of stunted growth declined from 34% to 30% for the period between 2015 and 2022. The health of women of reproductive age, which is 15 to 49 years, also improved over the period, with prevalence of anemia falling from 44.8% in 2015 to 28.8% in 2022. The proportion of the population covered by social protection reached 25% in 2022 compared to 9% in 2015. The Productive Social Safety Net program is now a global best practice, having expanded to cover all rural households in the country. And furthermore, evidence from an impact evaluation of the Productive Social Safety Net on youth well-being and the transition to adulthood across the poor households suggests that the program has successfully improved human capital for beneficiary poor households and improved access to education and health services, as well as skills for the target group. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, in order to consolidate the gains, first, Tanzania is currently reviewing the Education and Training Policy of 2014, Education Act and curricula. And the review aims at improving the education system to cater for talent development, hands-on skills, building competencies, positive thinking, and acquaint graduates with cutting-edge technology. The review is further expected to increase youth productivity, competitiveness in labor market, as well as preparing graduates to become job creators and not job seekers. Second, we are embarking on extending technical and vocational training centers to cover all the 184 districts in the country. And thirdly, efforts are also being directed at embracing learning, digital revolution, and scaling up social service delivery and rural electrification to reach out to all the villages. And similarly, we are expanding ICT infrastructure development, taking advantage of a rapid digital uptake in the country, which is evidenced by an increase in the population, in the proportion of adult individuals using internet from 36.5% in 2015 to 49% in 2021. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, as I conclude, allow me to throw a few thoughts that I find to be necessary for unlocking human capital potential in our continent. First, given the limited fiscal space of most African countries, I am of the view that regional and multilateral financial institutions need to do more to devise innovative financing solutions in support of Africa's drive to accelerate human capital development. We should all note that human capital investment is long-term in nature and therefore requires low-cost financing with low-term maturity. Second, the private sector is a key beneficiary of human capital development efforts, and I therefore call upon this meeting to discuss on how best the private sector could be motivated to actively collaborate with governments as co-sponsors and co-producers of quality human capital. And third, I firmly believe that our training institutions, being key players in human capital development, can and should help the continent bolster local capacities to effectively manage and exploit our natural resource endowment. It is an irony that the continent spends much of its financial resources to improve knowledge for harnessing our own natural resource wealth. African training institutions should therefore reposition themselves and collaborate amongst themselves to produce homegrown solutions to Africa's challenges. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, under the African Union Agenda 2063, the continent has made human capital development one of its primary flagship themes. This theme is centered on improving access to healthcare and education for all people, advancing gender equality, empowering women, and developing the necessary skills and competencies for growth and transformation of the continent. By 2025, the African Union hopes to have at least 70% of African children enrolled in pre-primary education, while also prioritizing investments in tertiary and higher education, as well as technical and vocational training programs. That means we have a very short time left to deliver. I therefore wish to take this opportunity to encourage all of us to take advantage of this forum to learn, share experiences, network, and search for opportunities to lift up Africa's stock of quality human capital, which is very critical for realizing the Africa we want. With these remarks, I'm very pleased to announce that the technical session of the Summit on Human Capital is now officially launched. And I thank you for your kind attention. Asante sana.
Let's continue to put our hands together for that wonderful remarks. Thank you very much, Your Excellency, the Vice President, who is our guest of honor this morning, Honorable Dr. Philip Isdori Mpango of the United Republic of Tanzania. May we kindly request you to at least have an opportunity to listen to one keynote speech, if your time allows, which is going to be presented by Honorable Dr. Olavo Avelino Garcia Correia, the Vice Prime Minister of Cape Verde. Kindly, let's proceed as our guest of honor has to run. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Let me switch to Portuguese. I think we have translation. Muito bom dia a todos. Yeah. Okay. This channel for the translator. We have information about the channel. Okay. Is it working? Okay. Muito bom dia a todos. Senhora Vice-Presidente da República Unida da Tanzânia, Sr. Dr. Filipe Isdor Mpango, Excelência, Senhora Vice-Presidente do Banco Mundial, Doutora Vitória Kwakwa, Senhora Vice-Presidente do Banco Mundial para a área do capital humano, Senhor Ministro das Finanças da República Unida da Tanzânia, ilustres chefes de Estado, ministros, pontos focais do capital humano e delegados do governo de toda a região aqui presentes, prezados participantes, caros convidados, minhas senhoras e meus senhores, quero desde logo agradecer todas as exposições que foram colocadas à nossa disposição e à disposição das nossas delegações, pelas entidades oficiais da República Unida da Tanzânia e também pelo apoio do Banco Mundial para estarmos aqui presentes. É para nós um enorme prazer estarmos aqui neste país africano, Tanzânia. Um país belíssimo. Eu, antes de conhecer a Tanzânia, pensava que Cabo Verde era o país mais belo do mundo. Mas depois de estar aqui, já vi que temos um grande concorrente. Tanzânia é um país belíssimo. Um país belíssimo onde vamos discutir um tema que é crucial e que é crítico para a África e para o mundo. O capital humano, o emprego jovem, as competências, a pobreza e a pobreza extrema. Eu sou Ministro das Finanças de Cabo Verde. Se eu tiver um único euro, um único escudo, ou um único dólar, dentre todas as opções que eu tenho à minha frente para investir, eu não tenho dúvidas nenhumas que eu investiria no capital humano. Porque nós podemos construir estradas, portos, aeroportos, podemos ter edifícios belíssimos, mas se não tivermos recursos humanos qualificados e preparados para rentabilizar esses investimentos, podemos não ter o retorno. Mas se formarmos os recursos humanos capacitados, qualificados, mesmo não tivermos estradas, portos e aeroportos, são esses recursos humanos, são esses jovens, são essas mulheres que vão cuidar e seguramente que vamos ter no futuro estradas, portos e aeroportos. Por isso, é fundamental que investamos no capital humano. Esse é um apelo a todo o continente, a todos nós que temos a responsabilidade de liderar o continente africano. Investamos no capital humano. É um investimento com retorno certo. É um investimento com retorno garantido. O nosso continente está confrontado com desafios acrescidos. É um continente jovem. É um continente que está a crescer muito em termos populacionais. Devemos duplicar a nossa população até 2050, passando de 1,3 mil milhões de pessoas para 2,5 mil milhões de pessoas. É um desafio enorme para a educação, para a saúde, para a segurança, para o emprego, para o acesso à energia, para o acesso à água, para a habitação, para o saneamento, mas também para a educação dos nossos jovens. Dizia a minha amiga Vitória Kwakwa, durante o African Caucus na Ilha do Sal, que o continente africano não está no lugar que deveria estar. E eu concordo. Mas se não está no lugar que devia estar, temos de mudar. Não podemos ficar onde estamos. Para não ficar onde estamos, o apelo é mudar. Temos de mudar. E para mudar, não podemos continuar a fazer da mesma forma. Temos de mudar a abordagem, sermos mais ambiciosos, novas atitudes, novas práticas, para fazermos mais com mais escala, para fazermos mais rápido, mas sobretudo com impacto nas nossas populações. A pandemia da Covid-19 mas também a guerra na Ucrânia agravaram os desafios do nosso continente. Trouxeram novas exigências ao tema do emprego, da clivagem digital, da insegurança energética e alimentar, problema da dívida, da inflação, mas nada disso é relevante para assumirmos o nosso compromisso com os nossos jovens, com as nossas crianças e com as mulheres africanas. E, em boa verdade, caros amigos, caros africanos, ministros, nós temos em todo o mundo coisas belíssimas. Pontes, montanhas, vales, lagos, praias, edifícios. Mas eu não tenho dúvidas de que o mais belo de tudo e de todos são as pessoas. São os jovens, são as mulheres, são as crianças. E essas pessoas merecem o nosso investimento, o nosso engajamento, o nosso foco, para que possam ter condições para viver com dignidade e em dignidade. E, em boa verdade, não faz sentido que milhões de africanos não têm acesso à energia. Não se pode falar hoje de educação sem energia, sem água potável. Como é que se pode explicar hoje, nós, líderes africanos, que milhões de nossos conterrâneos não têm acesso à água potável, não têm acesso à energia, não têm acesso à educação, não têm acesso ao emprego e ao emprego jovem qualificado? Milhões de africanos jovens estão a procurar deixar o continente por falta de oportunidades. É fundamental que assumamos as nossas responsabilidades com o nosso continente, porque os parceiros podem ajudar, e o Banco Mundial tem ajudado muito nos últimos anos em matéria do capital humano. Aumentou o seu portfólio com o continente africano em matéria de capital humano para 8,9 bilhões de dólares americanos. Mais 9 bilhões para projetos ligados às mulheres. E também toda uma conexão dos projetos do Banco Mundial com o capital humano. Mas, mais uma vez, mesmo que o Banco Mundial triplique o seu portfólio de investimentos, se nós, africanos, não assumamos as nossas responsabilidades com a liderança para que tenhamos um continente africano mais democrático, mais transparente, para que protejamos os direitos das mulheres e garantamos a igualdade de género, para que garantamos o acesso à educação, à saúde, à energia, a todas as crianças, a todos os jovens e a todos os adolescentes africanos, por mais que o Banco Mundial triplique o portfólio, os problemas vão continuar. Essa responsabilidade é nossa e ninguém pode substituir-nos neste quesito. O Banco Mundial é um parceiro, agradeço o grande engajamento do Banco Mundial, mas quero fazer um apelo às lideranças africanas que assumamos as nossas responsabilidades com o continente. É quase vergonhoso que milhões de africanos não têm acesso à energia. É quase vergonhoso que milhões de dólares americanos são transferidos para fora em financiamentos ilícitos, em corrupção, em pilhagem de recursos naturais, quando temos crianças, jovens e meninas a morrer de fome porque não têm acesso a bens básicos e a bens essenciais. Onde estamos, não podemos continuar. Temos de mudar. E a mudança não começa com o envelope financeiro, com o cheque. A mudança começa com a atitude, com comportamentos e com a mudança de abordagem em relação ao futuro do continente. Menos corrupção, corrupção zero. É preciso fechar as portas ao branqueamento de capitais, ao financiamento ilícito. É preciso fechar as portas à utilização indevida dos recursos naturais em África e colocar tudo isto ao serviço dos jovens africanos, das mulheres africanas e das meninas africanas. E assim, com mais envelope do Banco Mundial e de outros parceiros, conseguiremos atingir os objetivos. Este é o meu grande apelo. E olhar para o capital humano numa perspectiva holística, porque o nosso foco é a pessoa, a educação para a pessoa, a saúde para a pessoa, o emprego para a pessoa, o saneamento para a pessoa, conectividade para a pessoa, é a pessoa humana. É uma criança, um jovem, uma mulher, um africano. É para a pessoa é que nós temos de olhar para o tema do capital humano. Eu quero deixar esta nota que este é um dos temas mais importantes que estamos a debater. Eu incito o Banco Mundial, mas também a Tanzânia, a República Unida da Tanzânia e todos os países africanos a que continuemos a debater este tema. Porque se há tema importante para o futuro da África e do mundo, é o capital humano em África. É a dignidade da pessoa humana em África. E criarmos as condições para que cada africano possa ter o mínimo para viver com dignidade e em dignidade. Este é um tema que não nos pode deixar calados. E mais do que deixar calados, temos de agir. Se não estamos no lugar onde devíamos estar, temos de mudar. E para mudar, não basta apenas falar, temos de agir. Um apelo também à ação para que as coisas mudem no continente africano. E temos um continente que tem tudo. Tem recursos humanos, tem jovens, tem mulheres, tem recursos financeiros, porque nós somos exportadores líquidos de capital. Temos recursos naturais, a África é riquíssima. Temos um continente belíssimo do ponto de vista territorial. E temos parceiros a nível global, privados e públicos, para investir no continente africano. E, portanto, o que é que falta? Essa é a questão que não nos pode calar. O que é que falta? O que é que falta para fazermos a mudança? Para darmos o salto? Liderança, boa governação, transparência, responsabilidade, accountability. Este é o tema que nós temos de olhar com responsabilidade. E quero falar-vos de Cabo Verde, um pequeno estado insular arquipelágico, que há cerca de 45 anos já era considerado como um país inviável e que tem feito progressos importantes nos últimos anos. Nós garantimos o acesso à educação a todas as crianças de Cabo Verde, pago pelos contribuintes cabo-verdianos. Garantimos o acesso à saúde a todos os cabo-verdianos. Ao nível da energia, acesso à rede pública de energia cobre quase 90% das pessoas. E queremos rapidamente atingir os 100%. Água potável, 70% de todos os cabo-verdianos. E a nossa meta é atingir 100% até 2026, até 2030. E o grande tema que nós queremos agora alcançar é, em 2026, com as medidas que estamos a tomar, eliminar a pobreza extrema em Cabo Verde. O ano não é mais importante, a ambição é que é importante. Nós queremos ser um país sem pobreza extrema, em que todos possam ter as condições para viver com dignidade e em dignidade. Para isso, nós já criamos uma taxa turística, onde nós vamos buscar os impostos para financiar esse combate. Montamos um sistema de cadastro social único, com o apoio do Banco Mundial, para sabermos quem é pobre, porque é que é pobre, onde que ele está, para que o Estado possa fazer política pública com justiça, com igualdade de oportunidades, com transparência. E estamos engajados enquanto governo para até 2026 eliminar a pobreza extrema em Cabo Verde. Eu convido a todos os meus colegas africanos que estão aqui que abraçamos este desafio. Eliminar a pobreza extrema em África e reduzir a pobreza absoluta. Não se pode falar do capital humano com esses conceitos lindíssimos de empoderamento, capital humano, transição energética, transição digital e outros conceitos bonitos quando temos milhões de africanos na pobreza e milhões de africanos na pobreza extrema, a viver abaixo do limite daquilo que é a dignidade da pessoa humana. Mais uma vez, a pessoa humana é que é importante e a pessoa humana é que conta. Eu quero desafiar o Banco Mundial para que, termino a minha intervenção neste ponto, para que anualmente organizemos um encontro dos ministros africanos, do setor, mas também da família e inclusão social, com o chefe de Estado, para discutirmos uma agenda para eliminar a pobreza extrema em África. Nós queremos, Cabo Verde, acolher este evento já em 2024. E podemos fazer um ano num país africano e no ano seguinte como um side event à margem das Assembleias Anuais do Banco Mundial e do Fundo Monetário Internacional. Para, analisarmos os resultados, quem está a ter bons resultados ou não, as melhores práticas, onde estamos, compromissos com a nossa sociedade e mais, accountability, transparência, prestação de contas, não apenas ao nosso país, mas a todo o continente africano e a todo o mundo. E quem não estiver em condições de fazer isto, não pode estar em condições de governar hoje. Se nós não temos um olhar para aqueles que mais precisam, não temos a legitimidade para estarmos a governar. E, portanto, quero desafiar o Banco Mundial para que organizemos periodicamente este evento. Cabo Verde quer acolher esse evento já em 2024, mas com foco na eliminação da pobreza extrema, olhar para as melhores práticas, para os resultados, mas sobretudo também estabelecer compromissos e engajamentos com o futuro para que a África possa ser um continente livre da pobreza extrema, livre da pobreza, para que cada africano possa viver com dignidade e em dignidade. Não há nada que nos possa fazer mais felizes. Ver que os africanos têm as condições para viver com dignidade e em dignidade. E o capital humano é o início e o fim de tudo. O desenvolvimento é para as pessoas e o desenvolvimento é feito pelas pessoas. Por isso é que esta conferência é muito importante e agradeço imenso essa oportunidade de estar aqui e com essa mensagem de otimismo. Temos desafios, somos capazes, temos a força, temos os recursos, precisamos de boa liderança, de boa governação, transparência, accountability e, sobretudo, sentido de compromisso com os nossos concidadãos, com os nossos países, com o nosso continente e com o mundo. Vamos conseguir e bem-haja esta conferência. Muito obrigado.
Thank you, Honorable Dr. Correia, the Vice Prime Minister from Cape Verde, for your keynote speech. Our guest of honor, Your Excellency, the Vice President of the United Republic of Tanzania, Dr. Philip Isdori Mpango. Once again, thank you very much for officiating this technical session, which is the kickoff of the long-awaited Africa Human Capital Heads of State Summit 2023. We remain greatly honored for your time. We would now be happy and ready to allow you to proceed with the rest of your agenda. May I request all of us to please stand up as our guest of honor is leaving us. Can we put our hands together? Thank you so much. Truly appreciating your time. Thank you so much. Kindly be seated. We shall now proceed with the second part of the program after the official launch of the kickoff of the summit, the technical bit. I would now like to invite Dr. Andrew Zabalen, the Chief Economist for the Africa region at the World Bank, who is coming to do a presentation on investing in people to transform African economies. Distinguished delegates, we can proceed to take our seats. Thank you very much. Distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen, let's put our hands together for Dr. Andrew Zabalen. Karibu.
Is this on? All right, distinguished guests, honorable ministers, all protocols observed. After those very inspiring speeches, it's going to be a hard act to actually get into this technical note, but here we are. What I wanted to start off by asking is, if you were to make a list of all the things that will actually influence the trajectory of African development in the next 20 or 30 years, it's hard to imagine a much bigger question than, say, demography. Just to fix ideas, let me give you a scenario, right? So this is a projection and it is a prediction. It's not a hypothesis, but it's a prediction. So in our lives, we've kind of known two major centers of population growth, or centers of population, not necessarily population growth, but centers of population. And that's China and India. China, which until recently was the most populous country in the world, and India, which until recently was the second most populous, but a few months ago became the most populous country. So if you look at the graph on the left, you will see the projections for those two major centers of population in the world. China's population is already predicted to have peaked, and it is set for decline for quite a while. India's population is expected to peak in a few years and then decline for a while. But if you see the red line, that's Africa. Now I know Africa is not a country, so I don't need to remind everyone here that Africa is not a country. But nonetheless, this is a scenario that this continent hasn't known for a long time, that it is going to be a major center of population in the world. If you look at the graph on the left, that is the projections for prime working population for the next several decades. Again, as you can see, the green line, which is China, has already peaked by 2020, the prime age population, and it is slated for a steep decline. And India is expected to peak in around 2030 and then have a decline. The one region that is going to have prime age population that is growing is, again, the African continent. And it's not expected, the prime age working population is not expected to decline or even peak until about 2100, several decades from now. So you've heard already that, in fact, we're going to get a doubling of the population in only about two and a half decades in. So this is the world that we're going to inherit. But let me give you another scenario. So look at this scenario. This is what China has achieved in 40 years by maximizing its demographic boom. right? So if you look at it doesn't matter whether you look at per capita or just straightforward, non-per capita. If you look at the scenario 3, China was able to increase its incomes 30 times in 40 years, from 1980 to 2020. Okay, 30 times. And by the way, in 1980, China was poorer than a lot of African countries are today. But it was able to increase its income 30 times and become one of the most powerful and rich economies and center of global growth. Now, I give scenario 2. The question, I guess, we all have to answer is, can Africa achieve those levels of growth? If Africa were to achieve China's levels of growth in the next 40 years, which is by the time we conclude the Agenda 2063 of Africa, could we get 30 times incomes of what we have now? Could we even get half? In which case, the GDP for Africa will actually increase by 6 times. And that's scenario 2. Or will it be status quo, which is what you see in the last, to the far right, which is basically just a doubling of income in 40 years. Right? So that will not be enough. It won't be sufficient. So you have this big demographic boom that is underway and it's about to come. And you have an opportunity to turn that into something incredibly powerful and give prosperity to populations in Africa. But there is nothing that is going to turn magically this large population into a very productive population. So you need 3 ingredients. One is investing in people, and you've heard a lot about that, and you're going to hear a lot more about that throughout the time we'll have at this conference. Investing in people, of course, starts really early. Can you move? So there are 3 things that go into human capital, right? There is survival of both children and mothers, of course. There is schooling, and particular quality of schooling. And there is health, especially preventing stunting of children. But it starts early. So as you heard a lot this morning, it's really, really important if you want to maximize the benefits from human capital, it's really important to start really early, because investments in human capital take a long time to work their way through the system and to be realized in time. Here is an example of what I mean, right? We will not be able to get the types of transformation that China achieved with these levels of human capital. Right now in Africa, a child born today will have productivity at the time when they turn 18 of only about 40% of what they would actually were able to achieve if they had a full complement of health and education. By comparison, look at the graphs either in green or even yellow, which is Vietnam and China, East Asian countries. They have much higher levels of human capital. And they're able to utilize that human capital to turn them into really productive workers and labor force. We, at the moment, the best country in Africa, which is Mauritius, has only about 60% levels of productivity that they could have if they had provided complete education and health for its population. Learning quality is low, as you can see. Again, African countries have some of the lowest quality of learning. Next. Stunting levels are some of the highest in Africa. So as you can see, the lower, again, I'm giving these comparisons both for East Asian countries and Africa because I think it's clarifying in the sense in which what it will take to actually achieve the transformation in our economies if we want to utilize the big human capital or demographic bulge that we're going to get. There are many interventions that one can do in basically investing in human capital, and I think on these issues, both health and education, I think they're fairly well known, right? You start early, you do immunizations, you do prenatal care, you try and prevent prevalence of very, very deadly diseases like malaria and so on. In education, again, early childhood education, and you've had also many of you who have been in technical discussions yesterday also heard about the importance of nutrition, early nutrition in a child's cognitive development. But what I want us to think about today is to go beyond health and education and think about human capital as also involving learning on the job. And so it's really, really important to think about how to create jobs for this large demographic boom that the African continent is about to have. The second thing is, even if in fact, African countries who are successful in investing in human capital, both health and education, that will not be enough to get transformation. What you will need is well-functioning markets. And why are well-functioning markets that are also large important? They're important because well-functioning markets encourage entrepreneurship and creativity by rewarding innovative solutions and ideas. They also are the basis for job creation. Well-functioning markets create demand for specialized skills and knowledge. And well-functioning markets are those that are ensuring fair competition and protect against capture. So in a way, well-functioning markets that are very large also allow for diversification, and they tend to be very resilient, or they anchor resilient economies. That means well-functioning markets are the things that we need that create an environment where human capital investments are more likely to be rewarded and lead to positive outcomes for individuals, for businesses, and for societies as a whole. So I'm just giving you an example here of what well-functioning markets can be. So I gave you the examples of what China was able to achieve with its huge demographic population. And so you might wonder, well, that's really not a good analogy because African countries are 48 or 54, if you go all the way up north, and they are all fragmented, and so it's very hard to coordinate policies, to make decisions, right, and so on and so on. But you have a blueprint, and the blueprint is the African continental free trade. If African continental free trade can be implemented and can be made to work, you will have a larger market or larger market than India and China combined. Right? And you can see already some projections about how much poverty, in fact, this might be underestimates, how much poverty reduction you can get if you actually implemented African continental free trade. So these massive gains are possible with much larger markets that are well functioning. But in order to get large markets that are well functioning, that are safeguarded, you will need the third ingredient, which is to build institutions. why do we really need good institutions? I don't need to actually explain that here, but I think it's important to remind ourselves, right? Good institutions give stability and predictability for business to make long-term investments in education, in skills, but also in entrepreneurship. They ensure rule of law and property rights, and they safeguard fairness and competition and reduce corruption. They also allow us to do long-term planning in order to be able to provide services that we need. So in the interest of time, here are the 3 ingredients that are necessary if African countries want to really maximize the demographic boom that is coming together. You need to invest in the people. You need really good institutions that will require really hard work to safeguard cooperation, long-term planning and predictability, and you need markets that are large, competitive, and integrated. Thank you for listening.
Thank you so much, Dr. Dublin. Can we put our hands together once again for him? For that provoking presentation, the ingredients are what we need right now, and I'm happy the way you've put them together, investing in people. This is what we're looking on to for the next 2 days, but also promoting mobility, integration, and markets, looking on to the African continental free trade as a potential bigger than India and China combined, but again, building institutions, and this again is what we're here for. Distinguished delegates, after that powerful presentation, I would like now to turn onto the session where we're going to have a moderation session, and I would like to invite the moderator who will then introduce the panelists. Looking onto science behind human capital, I would like to call to the podium Mr. Ian Solomon. Mr. Ian Solomon. Thank you so much. And he will then introduce his panel and take us through this wonderful panel looking onto the science behind human capital. Most welcome. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and good morning, everybody. All protocols observed. It really is an honor to be here. Thank you, Andrew DeBellin, for a thorough and thought-provoking presentation. In this first panel this morning, we want to look deeply at the first strategy that Dr. DeBellin identified, investing in people. And we want to consider why human capital? Why now? Another way to frame that question could be why human capital rather than other competing investment priorities? And why now rather than addressing other development challenges first? We believe this summit will make that case based on the science behind human capital. I want to thank the government of Tanzania for hosting this important summit and applaud all of you for being here. And I want to recognize the World Bank Group for concerted efforts to highlight the critical role of human capital investments in promoting and sustaining economic growth, productivity, poverty reduction, social cohesion, and enabling citizens and all people to achieve their potential. This is an important conversation because of the choices and trade-offs faced by all of you, by policymakers, when assessing the range of priorities for public investment, whether it's infrastructure, security, energy, industrial promotion, environment, and more, and continued recovery from COVID. And given the long-term nature of human capital and the imperative to sustain investments, often through economic and political cycles, this is a conversation to be prioritized. We are speaking not only about the future workforce and the future domestic markets of producers and consumers, but also the future citizenry, the future scholars and entrepreneurs, artists and scientists, and the future of leadership for the continent and for the world. Well, we have a very distinguished and learned panel today, which will look at several important dimensions of human capital, including the population of youth, nutrition, education, women's empowerment, national productivity. We will shine a light on gender, the potential demographic dividend, and on opportunities for business and the private sector. As we begin the conversation, I'd like to suggest two questions for all of us to keep in mind. The first is the question of quality. How do we ensure investments yield high quality outcomes? The second question is about leadership, and I am the Dean of the School of Leadership and Public Policy at the University of Virginia in the United States. This question about leadership, which is an element of human capital, what is the type of initiative, courage, discernment, persistence, imagination required to achieve these results? Well, speaking of both quality and leadership, it gives me great pleasure to introduce our panelists. First is the Honorable Professor Adolf Mkenda, Minister of Education, Science, and Technology for the government of Tanzania. A professor of economics at the University of Dar es Salaam, Professor Mkenda has served previously as Minister of Agriculture and as Permanent Secretary for Natural Resources, Tourism, Foreign Affairs, East Africa Cooperation, Industry, Trade, and Investment. Thank you for being with us and for the hospitality of your government and people for this summit. And I'm going to call up all of the panelists. So next we will have the Honorable Professor Njuguna Ndung'u, Cabinet Secretary for Kenya, responsible for the National Treasury and Economic Planning. Prior to his appointment as Cabinet Secretary, Professor Ndung'u was the Executive Director of the African Economic Research Consortium. He is a Professor of Economics at the University of Nairobi and a former Governor of the Central Bank of Kenya. Welcome. Next, we have the Honorable Lariba Zuwera Abudu, Minister for Gender, Children, and Social Protection in Ghana. Welcome. Minister Abudu was previously the Deputy Chief Executive Officer of the Northern Development Authority in Ghana. She's educated in special education, leadership, and development. Next, we have my friend, Dr. Donald Kaberuka, who likely needs no introduction in this room, formerly the President of the African Development Bank and also Minister of Finance and Economic Planning in Rwanda. Dr. Kaberuka is also co-chair of the United Nations Secretary General High-Level Panel on Internal Displacement. He's the African Union's High Representative for the Peace Fund and board chair of the Global Fund to Fight AIDS, Tuberculosis, and Malaria. Dr. Kaberuka is managing partner at Southbridge with a strong focus on developing infrastructure and policies to strengthen African institutions. Welcome, Dr. Kaberuka. Finally, last but not least, is Sheikh Omar Saidi, currently the Director for Africa for the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. Mr. Saidi was previously with the World Bank Group's International Finance Corporation as Regional Director for Africa and Global Director for Human Resources. He has been very involved with multiple private sector investments and philanthropy in African human capital. Welcome, Mr. Saidi. And for today's panel, I will ask each panelist a different question to start. And after that round, we will have a broader conversation on several core themes of human capital. Time permitting, we'll take a question or two from the audience. And I'm going to join the panelists there, but first I'll start my question to Professor Mkenda. I'd like you to, if you're willing, to address the importance issues of early childhood development and nutrition. Human capital investments begin at or even before birth. Nutritional and educational investments made in utero and in the first 3 years of life are associated with long and productive lives for people. Yet, government investments in those early years have been disproportionately small. The question that I'd like you to kick off this discussion with is how can governments be encouraged to make investments in early childhood development and on infant and child nutrition? Thank you, Dr. Mkenda.
Thank you very much, Moderator. Just to start with, I think as the earlier presentation, when we talk about human capital, we are not just talking about the number of people. We are talking about what has been invested in people to make them more productive. Education is more important, as much as health, nutrition, and so on. Within the education system, we know preschool is very important. Early childhood education is very important as a foundation for future education, to make kids able to cope with school activities going forward. It is true that early childhood education has not received generally across the continent as much attention as primary education going forward. But it is imperative that we increase our investment in that area. The biggest challenge is that schools must be within the vicinity of households so that the kids that have to go to school can easily attend the schools and come back. In Tanzania, for instance, in order to facilitate this, we have started to have special classes that are actually outside the main schools to bring them closer to the population so that it will be easier to transport them to school and come back, what we call in Kiswahili shule shikizi. That is, you have a primary school in one area, but you can actually have classes run by that primary school, but even closer to areas of locations of high density populations. It's a big challenge because we need to increase investments in terms of infrastructure and also in terms of training, people will handle that. But for sure, if we really want to achieve in education, we must increase our investments in early childhood education.
Thank you, Professor Mkenda. I'd like to now reach out to Minister Ndungu from Kenya to talk about the demographic dividend or divergence. Africa's population, as we heard from Dr. de Bellin, is expected to be youthful throughout much of this century. And for many countries in the past century, youthful populations have been accompanied by increased prosperity. As Africa remains youthful, the rest of the world will be aging rapidly. By 2050, 1 out of every 3 people under 30 will be in sub-Saharan Africa. This means the demand for youth will be much higher outside of Africa. What does Africa need to do to maximize human capital utilization and realize the productive potential of its youthful demography?
Thank you very much, and I'm quite happy to be here and to be in this session. And in fact, yesterday I was asking myself this question: why now? Why are we concerned about the human capital development now? After almost 60 years, the average of African countries, the development planning period, why are we still now focusing on human capital development? But let me go back to the issue that you raised about demographic dividend. And when you look at even when Andrew was presenting, he's actually showing that the graph will start picking up at 2050 for Africa. And in a sense, I think I've seen several papers that are looking into this. In 2008, there was still a projection or a forecast showing that Kenya itself, for example, will actually achieve a demographic dividend in 2050. But somehow we may need to come back and reinvest or look at the numbers again. Because we made an assumption that there will be mortality rates will be declining, and so it means that the health indicators will be improving. But just if you look at just that alone, if you look at the last 3-4 years, what has happened in Africa, it's actually devastating even to look at the health indicators. For example, the COVID-19, the second, the devastating climate change and drought has actually reversed the efforts of poverty reduction and even inequality to the last, perhaps just taken us like 20 years back. In a sense, you're actually saying the investment in those areas, especially in health indicators, is actually challenged. That's one. The second thing is that we anticipated that there will be better nutrition outcomes. But you can see when you talk about nutrition and poverty, you actually are showing that something somehow in this decade, the starting of this decade, we are challenged. And that is the anticipation that the dependency rate will decline so that there will be massive employment. And so the people who are young and old, as a proportion in terms of the total, the labor force will be like just greater than that. And so it means that we can actually ask ourselves, is the timing correct now? But let me say, what is it that creating my impression that there is pessimism in achieving this demographic dividend? First, let me say that just like Andrew, for me, I'm very concerned about institutional quality. Going forward, and even if you look at the last 20 years, the institutional quality in African countries, you can actually talk about actually declining institutional quality. The second thing is availability of productive employment. We have had several programs working with, for example, Latin America and even the Brookings, looking at even the youth unemployment. What may have happened? But what may have happened is that with the youth unemployment comes in because there is a missing middle here. I looked at African economies for the last couple of years, and I could see that there was a massive expansion of primary school education and secondary school education and high school education. That's at the university level. In fact, today, there is a premium for you having a degree to the point where the crooked guys buy one because there is a premium for the degree. But what happened in some countries is that they destroyed the middle. That is the technical and vocational training, the TVET. We call it the TVET. In a sense that you get to the university, you don't get a job, and then if you went to a TVET, you would actually get to, and the majority of the people were dropping out. That is what I'm calling the missing middle. And we have to go back and ask ourselves, how can we reverse this? I've seen that, for example, in Kenya, they have started amnesty to reduce this. Because this is something that could have helped us in terms of focusing on the 2050 in terms of the demographic dividend. Actually, this is also something that we have covered with Brookings and wider. We studied 7 countries. We call them the 7 African lions. And we wanted to show that these countries have the potential to lead the way, but they are not leading the way. What is happening? And the summary point is also consistent with what Andrew has explained. What is happening to the institutions? What is happening to their markets? And what is happening to the Human Capital Development Index in terms of the way we anticipate it would go? And this is quite consistent with what we're saying. So the picture I'm painting is actually to show exactly what is happening. Let me stop there for now. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Ndungu. And I want to come back to 2 of your themes when we come back to the next round. This question of pessimism in the demographic dividend and also vocational training in connection to labor markets. But first, I'd like to, talking a lot about the increase in investments in education, is turn now to Mr. Sadie, talk about the quality of learning. Because yes, Africa, like much of the developing world, has made enormous progress in sending more children to school and building more schools. Unfortunately, the quality of education remains low across much of the continent, which lowers the human capital impacts of education. And of course, the learning loss during the pandemic further adds to that problem. How can countries improve their education systems to improve the quality of education? And how can digital technologies and platforms be used to improve student learning and to better prepare them for the future world of work? Mr. Sadie?
Thank you, Ian. Good morning, everyone. Very delighted to be here. Let me start with three very important things, very simple, that need to happen for the quality that you talked about to happen. First, you need to have teachers that are well trained that show up in school. And then you have children who are learning that also show up. And the third element is having the right curriculum. Now, these three things seem very, very simple, but unfortunately, they do not always happen. Today, 9 out of 10 boys and girls cannot actually read by the time that they reach age 10. And I insist on the word cannot. And that's in sub-Saharan Africa. In contrast, if you look at high-income countries, 9 out of 10 children can, and that's the difference, read by the time that they reach age 10. And this is where the problem begins. And this is why we are very focused on starting with the base. A lot of things can be fixed later on, but we strongly believe that it starts at the primary school level. And this is where foundational learning is critical in terms of trying to make sure that you have the quality that you need at that base, and then you use that base going forward. And as you think about that quality, I just want to talk about 3 proven solutions that we are advocating in terms of making sure that that quality is there. It starts with structured pedagogy, where you have an approach that enables you and help teachers to have the right kind of training and also the right materials in the classroom. And then the next thing is making sure that you have differentiated instruction. So you could have children in the classroom being in the same grade, but not necessarily at the same level in the different topics that they look into. And this is where you have to have programs that are catered by level so that they can learn the right way and grow as they learn. And the third element is remediation. And this was particularly acute during the COVID time when you need additional instructions, additional time for those children who are left behind, who were not able to be in a classroom when they were supposed to actually have that opportunity. And a lot of this is documented in the book, the Smart Buys report, which was put together by a number of experts who were looking at just some of these basic things that you need to do in order to enhance the quality of learning. And then on the second part of the question that you were asking, educational technology, which we call EdTech. Now, to be realistic, I want to use the word can. So it can actually make a difference, particularly when we talk about the issues of accessibility, of affordability and quality, which are some of the basic barriers that we found in the field of education. And I use the word can simply because it does depend on the kind of infrastructure you have. Because today, very clearly, because of the fact that the smart phones, tablets, and other means are more available than they used to, it allows and makes it more possible to reach the communities that are basically remote communities and the ones that are not very easy to reach. And so that's the future. To the extent that those are put in place, it allows for scaling and to reduce the significant gap I've been talking about. So I'll stop here and hand it over back to you.
Thank you, Mr. Sidi. Minister Abudu, I'd like to turn to you now, and I'm so glad you're here with us today from Ghana. And I'd like to ask you about women's empowerment and outcomes. The already low investment in human capital is even lower for girls and women, which is reflected in lower educational outcomes during adolescence and beyond, in lower labor market outcomes throughout women's working lives, and often in reduced agency and voice in their homes and societies. What can countries do to improve these outcomes for women in Africa?
Thank you for having me and all protocol observed. I want to limit myself in 3 key points: education, health, and entrepreneurial skills for women. Why education? Education is the bedrock of every life in any country. One philosophy says, if you educate a man, you educate an individual. But if you educate a woman, you educate the whole nation. And I cannot testify in this room that all the women that are in this room are well educated and they are still learning. Learning is a process, everyday process. If you are educating the girl child, educate the adult child, and educate the old child, who we are. Because the girl child needs to learn from the adult child. The adult child needs to learn to the older child. You don't have to limit it. It's a process and experience. We are here. A lot of women are going to gain experience. I'm going to gain experience from my colleagues, and that will help me translate into my country. Another key point, let's make education accessible to all, no matter your disability, no matter who you are. And in Ghana, the government have introduced a lot of school growing activities that retain children in school, especially the school feeding exercise that we are doing, which has targeted 3.8 million students. And it has given jobs to 30,800 caterers. And these caterers buy the food from the farm gate, and the farmer has also benefited. Economically, women have been empowered. So it is something other countries can look at. The free senior high school, where everybody's in school, you don't pay fees, you are given laptops, you are given bags, you are given everything for free. So now we have a lot of girls in school as well as boys in school. So we have to build on an introduction of innovation technologies. Now it has come to stay. We need to introduce ICT in our schools. So if you look at Ghana, we have opened ICT labs in most of the schools. And we have also opened science schools that we call the STEM school, that every region have a STEM school. And in most cases, they are only girls that attend those schools. So definitely, we'll have the nurses, we'll have the midwives, we'll have the doctors, and we'll have the nutritionists from those schools. So other countries too can leverage on that. We should also look at registry. We should target registry that will give us data for the poor girls. And this can formulate policies for government to subsidize whatever their needs are. So let's use the registry data to emphasize on women empowerment. Health, reproduction, let's look at that one too. What do we do? At the early stage, the child needs to be taught about reproductive system, how it works. The adult needs to be taught when she starts the conception period, how the body changes, and devices. Also, let's look at the old age. When we grow old, our hormonal system changes in us. You have the hot flash, you have your hair coming out, and in some African countries, people term it to be witchcraft. And these are targeting the vulnerable women. And this will not yield to productivity. So we need to also train all these women to know about changes in their body. And we also have to bring education to the doorstep of the people, where we have to build more schools. We have to move away from theory and look at the practical aspect of teaching. China, they have developed because the people are taught practically. They feel it, they touch, they use it, and they produce something. Africans should look at that and also emulate those things. Our healthcare system should also be brought to the doorstep of our communities, where at least a woman pregnant will not, especially somebody who has no the money to travel to bigger city, will have access to health facility within their locality. Then let's also try to educate people on harmful practices in our communities. Where a woman is pregnant and they say you don't have to go to hospital because they will say it's not for your husband, it's for somebody. So they turn to the traditional birth attendants, and later on they have issues. But in Ghana, we have trained the traditional birth attendants and have given them kits so that if the women come there and they are able to deliver them, they will refer them back to hospital for more access. Entrepreneurial skills, the TVET, where technology is being taught, skills are being taught in schools. In my areas, I've realized that a lot of girls who go to the vocational training and are taught fashion designing, clothing, pastries and all those, when they come out, they don't wait for the formal job. They start business on their own. So before they get other jobs or they continue their education, they have been empowered with some funding. So we have to leverage on entrepreneurial skills and also educate a lot of women on that. A lot of women go through practice like you don't own a land. How do we leverage on that? I think women in this room can testify that me and you can own lands. We can own our husband property because we are educated, and nobody would fault us for that. So education is key in building a human capital outcome. I will leave it here and wait for more questions. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Minister Mbuda. Dr. Kaberuka, I'd like you to address the issue of human capital and productivity. And two parts to the question. How can we effectively invest in human capital development to enhance productivity and economic growth in today's rapidly changing and technologically advanced world? And second, what policies or strategies can be implemented to bridge the skills gap and promote lifelong learning opportunities, ensuring that individuals have the necessary capabilities to adapt to evolving job requirements and contribute to productivity going forward?
Thank you. Thank you very much, Ian. Good morning, colleagues. First of all, let me say that the presentation by the chief economist was excellent. It raised all the issues, so thank you. But also, colleagues have made points here which I agree with, so I don't have to repeat them, because I agree with all of them. I just have a couple of points to make, and I'll be brief. The chief economist pointed to China in the way they have got everything right. I actually think the best example for us here in Africa is not even China. It is another small country the size of Ethiopia, and that is Vietnam. So to give you an idea, the GDP of Vietnam in 1993 was just about $14 billion, $14 billion. The GDP of Vietnam today is just about $500 billion. $500 billion, from 14 to 500 in 30 years. Now, we can decide what has happened there, but those of you who are my age will remember images in the late 70s and the early 80s of people who are called the Vietnamese boat people. Do you remember? They were fleeing Vietnam in rickety boats trying to get to Australia, like some people try to cross the Mediterranean. It was the same. And that is not a long time ago. I was at school. But look, they've gone from 14 billion to $500 billion. Now, if you look at what is the secret, it's exactly the chief economist what he was saying. The way they invest in human capital, plus attracting foreign direct investment. If you look at the structure of the exports of Vietnam, you'll find that about 40% of all the Samsung products are made in Vietnam. So, human capital, and you attract FDI, foreign direct investment. And so, what have they done to attract FDI? That is the question you have to answer. Human capital is one of them. But I was there about a month ago. I found also that they've reduced malaria incidence by almost 70%. Malaria in a tropical country by 70% because of investing in basic health systems. Nothing very sophisticated. They've taken a huge advantage of digital. And also, luckily for them, they have relatively cheap energy. But the key issue has been human capital and attracting foreign direct investment. Because that's how you create jobs. But here is an issue which we are not discussing enough, and I want you to, in the next 2 days, to take a careful look at it. Because foreign direct investment, we're all competing for it. But the first thing people will look at is how stable the countries are. Stability of the countries. Now, Latin America missed the demographic dividend. I don't know if Professor Njuguna maybe later can say about this. Why? It was a very unstable continent. Debt crisis, macroeconomic instability, political instabilities, and they missed it. All right? And so it is very important we link up all these things together. And I'm glad you are raising the issue of institutions, because good institutions mean stability. I am on another panel, Ian, set up by the Secretary General of the UN on the Sahel. There's 100 million people in the Sahalan countries. It's called the International Panel on Security and Development in the Sahel. Now, many of those countries in the Sahel have actually, not in the free trade area, they have the highest form of integration possible. One currency, one central bank. So even integration on its own is not adequate. It is the secular instability of the Sahel which makes it difficult to attract foreign direct investment, even when you have one currency or something below it, maybe a common market. And so it is vitally important that we invest in human capital, but also in the environment which will make these young people prosper, which will make investment to be attracted. I mentioned Vietnam, but I can mention a few other countries in that region where the GDP has multiplied almost at the same magnitude because they are getting the dividend right. Now, two more small points in. I don't know how to say this because one of them is a bit controversial, is that I think too many of our senior policymakers are too distracted by issues around natural resources. They are distracted by looking for oil, gas, diamond, cobalt, whatever it is. And I do believe that probably this policy destruction is in DI. I wish it was given to human capital development. Because in that case, actually even the issue of natural resource will be managed by the SMP. But if the attention of leaders focus too much on these things under the soil, all right, there's less attention to the resource which matters most, which is, of course, human capital. Now, the final point, I think, is controversial, Ian, so I don't know how to say it. If you look at sub-Saharan Africa alone, a concept I don't like very much, by the way. I don't like it very much. It's an artificial artifact to divide Africa into south of the Sahara, north of the Sahara. But since in the World Bank, this is a concept you use, I hope you'll abandon it one day. Because the countries I'm working on in the Sahel, a country like Mali, Niger, Chad, you never know, what are they? Because the word Sahel in Arabic, I live in Tunisia a bit, so I know a bit of Arabic. The word Sahel means a bridge, a border, a barrier. I hope my Arabophone friends here can correct me. I like to call it a bridge, but that's not the point. The point is that about 60% of all Africans live in about 6 countries in Sub-Saharan Africa. 60%. So Mauritius can make progress, but how many are they? All right? But there are some big demographic densities where things will have to happen, because those are the engines. So the lack of Nigeria, Ethiopia, Kenya, Tanzania here, South Africa, DRC, because these demographic densities are absolutely important, because they act as engines, as multipliers, but also they so can, I think, make progress. So I'm optimistic, because everything to be done has been said, whether it is quality education, health systems, all that we know. We should just get about and do it. However, it is important that if the free trade area were very hard working to make sure it succeeds, we create also a stable, peaceful institution which can attract foreign direct investment from countries who have got surplus capital. Now, there's one thing the chief economist could have said, but I'm going to say it for him. Please forgive me. You see, because of those demographics in the world, the countries we call the global north, they have got a glut of savings. Savings are accumulating. A country like Japan, even if the central bank puts interest at -3, the savings are increasing because of demographic shifts. But they are looking for a return. Now, that return can only be available in countries like ours. This is what the return is. All right? So, on one side, there's a glut of savings, very low returns, because of what they perceive to be the risk for us in the global south. So, the combination of making sure we have good stable environments, macroeconomic stability, political stability, is precisely to reduce the risk, which will enable us to attract the savings as investment to create jobs arising from this demographic dividend, which, by the way, lasts for a very short period of time. It goes away in about 40 years. So you have to catch it before it disappears. But thank you very much. These are my small contributions.
Thank you, Dr. Kaberuka. Since you came back to the demographic dividend, and it's one of the questions that Professor Ndungu had started with, I'd actually would like each of you to reflect for a moment on, are you optimistic or pessimistic about this dividend? If you're optimistic, why? And if you are pessimistic, what would have to change to make you optimistic? And Professor Ndungu, since you raised the question, I'm going to start with you, and then I'll go to Mr. Nkenda and go to, actually, Professor Nkenda, you ready to start? Or do you want Professor Ndungu to answer his own question first?
Okay. I was wondering, because when you switched to green, it talks. Now it was refusing to do that. Thank you very much. And I can tell you about the optimism, because I do believe that listening yesterday and today, we have every reason to say, look, don't anticipate that everything has been going on well. We have had this critical mind in terms of trying to understand what is really happening. But let me offer 2 factors for this optimism that I do have. First is, I do believe, and this is something that I've heard for a long time, that growing the middle class is the one that is going to help us in terms of reversing this trend, especially the demographic dividend, the peace dividend, and all the dividends that you can think about. And that is something that we believe that the institutional quality and functioning markets is going to support. It's going to boost that middle class. Let me say this. For example, the new administration in Kenya has emphasized bottom-up economic transformation agenda. We call it BETA. The whole issue is, why bottom-up? Because so many people have been left behind and they have sunk into abject poverty. Why economic transformation? It's because capital accumulation, and that is consistent with what President Kaberuka has just said, the whole issue about capital accumulation is very, very important. And you can close the gap using, for example, foreign direct investment or even debt to try and grow the capital accumulation. But it has to get to thresholds that are going to ignite economic transformation. But we haven't managed to do that. That's why I'm saying the middle class is the one that can help us in terms of doing that. Why do I say this? First, they have a preference for peace. Second, they are the innovative group, and they are the investors at the domestic level. And of course, their consumption levels on average are much higher. And they are keen for markets to work. They are keen for markets to work because essentially, this is what I believe, that if markets are functioning, they're going to encourage growth, increased production and even productivity downstream, and especially for African farmers, smallholder farmers. And what you see upstream is actually increased incomes. That for me is a very, very critical factor, and is one basis of my optimism. The second one is actually going back to the drawing board in terms of nutrition, hunger, and even school feeding programs. Yesterday, we were presented with massive facts of showing that the first 1,000 days are very, very important for nutrition. But let's face it, African cities, arid and semi-arid areas, what they suffer most from is actually hunger. And I've seen that school feeding programs, in some cases where it has worked in Kenya, has actually increased enrollment rates in a very big percentage. So it means that will raise the enrollment, but it's also going to promote retention. Actually, urban poverty is actually pervasive in most African cities. And so it is a drag in terms of human capital development indicators. We believe that, but perhaps that's where there are incomes, but actually the poverty side is very, very important. I've seen studies that are linking school feeding programs to smart agriculture and to climate change. You can imagine that for itself, in terms of that linkage, is going to be very, very important. And that is why I'm actually saying that it offers some sense of optimism from my end. Those 2 points are very, very critical for me.
Thank you. Professor Mkenda.
Am I optimistic about Africa harnessing demographic dividend? I have qualified optimism, and a lot will depend on how we move forward from here. Sometimes we think it's just about the size of the market. Therefore, continental free trade area, maybe size matters. How about Mauritius and Botswana in terms of population and the market size? And of course, Kaberuka said, well, I think sometimes we are focusing on natural resources, thinking that will take us forward. And then how about Korea, South Korea, and the other countries? So let me digress and take a little bit of history very quickly and see the significance of this meeting and moving forward from here as Africa. It's commonplace to compare a country in Africa and a country in Southeast Asia in 1960s, Ghana, Tanzania, Kenya, and we look at the GDP and we find that they are almost at par. And that now we compare them and find that in terms of GDP, we are far apart. The problem with that comparison is a failure to look at differences in human capital accumulation at the baseline. What did they have in 60s in terms of human capital? Forget about the GDP. And how did they continue to invest and sustain high investment in human capital going forward. You cannot just compare two countries in terms of GDP. South Korea with thousands of years of statehood and also investments in human capital. So when we gained independence, there was that far cry, and I think it was Nkrumah who said, seek political kingdom first and everything will follow. And we recognize things like importance of education and health, dealing with poverty. Those were three key issues we were determined to address. So investments in education start to pick up. In Tanzania, for instance, we did not have a university. 1961, we gained independence, but we established quickly a university college in Dar es Salaam with 14 students. We start to build schools and try to have literacy rate for all the population. Going forward to 1980s with structural adjustments. I'm an economist and I know Kaberuka is and Professor Njuguna, but I'll talk about the World Bank. They came to us and say, return to education is so small, and therefore with the trickle-down economics, we should not waste too much time, resources in these activities that do not have high returns. We should reorganize the economy and, you lift the ship and all the boats will be lifted together. And we actually cut down on expenditure in education because we look at the returns to education. And the fallacy of that is that we are focusing on 2, 3, 4, a decade, years, instead of looking at intergenerational impact of capital accumulation that is the country like Korea and Taiwan had by 1960s when we tried to compare the two countries. When I talk to my colleagues from the World Bank, I say, when I see you focusing on human capital now, I'm so happy, and I know you're atoning for the sins of the World Bank bureaucrats in the 1980s and Bretton Woods. If we leave this summit with a commitment to continue to invest in education and other dimensions of human capital and sustain that investment, I'll have reasons to be optimistic about harnessing demographic dividend. If we allow the pendulum to keep shifting left and right and left and right, I think optimism will be misplaced. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Mkenda. Very, very powerful, and I appreciate the emphasis on intergenerational impact. We are very tight on time, so I'm going to offer the final three panelists, if they have a comment on their optimism, pessimism, very briefly, we'd love to hear it.
Hello. I think I want us to look at inter-country trade. Let's leverage on that so that we can trade among ourselves within African countries. We can also look at exporting our human resources that we have within our various countries. If Tanzania needs nurses that Ghana can produce, why not? If Tanzania have doctors that Ghana need, why can't we do that? Intertrade women in mining, what percentage do we know? What is the data of women in mining? How do we train them in risk factors in mining sectors? So we have to look at all those things holistically and come out with African solutions. I'm also looking at, in Ghana, we have something that we call Livelihood Empowerment Against Poverty. That's the LEAP program. And this program actually targeted the extreme poor within our communities, and women are majority. And then on one of the payment sessions, I went with my officers and we met a woman who lost a husband, left her with 6 kids. 2 of the boys were taken by the uncle, leaving her with 4 of the girls. They were dropouts from school. So we enrolled her on the LEAP program, Then the first payment of cash transfer, she went and bought guinea fowl eggs from the community, stood by the roadside, and she was selling. Now, she's the biggest woman selling eggs in that community. And she has been able to send her children back to school. And the last time I met her, she said, do you know, I now have suitors. They are coming for me. But I say, I want to take care of my children first. I said, oh, why not look at one and pay? He said, no, when they come, they will take my capital and they will eat my eggs. So she has built herself, she has empowered herself economically. And she now knows her right. We need to provide laws to protect women in businesses, women, girls in school. We need to get laws that will protect them. So I would like to say, let's look at inter-country trade, where there shouldn't be barriers, where we can all trade within ourselves. The ECOWAS trade, we should emphasize on it. And also try to bridge the gap between women. I mean, looking at us sitting here, there's a gender disparity because only one woman against how many men? So we need to look at that. Always, women, let's pull our colleagues, women along, and one day we will be there. Thank you so much.
Final words from Dr. Kaberuka and Mr. Sadie.
So it is whether I'm optimistic or pessimistic.
Yeah, but
No, I think we have no choice. That would be my answer. It is something we have to do. And here are my two reasons. How many people in this room would know that at the turn of the last century, 1900, actually, European population was bigger than the entire African population? Maybe that's why we're even colonized, because they were almost double our size. The numbers at the time around 1900 were around 150 million people, or thereabouts. And Europeans were more than us. Okay. But around 1950, numbers began to even, but African population bypassed the European around begin 2000. What is the importance of this? Is that throughout history, when you have had this kind of big demographic shifts, there are only two solutions. Solution number one is massive investment of the type I've been discussing to get to double-digit growth, to create jobs for the people. The second solution, historically again, is out-migration. How can you explain that 60% of Argentinians are Italians? It's because Italy was facing a huge demographic bulge, but there are no jobs for the Italians. So off they went. This is how they're in Argentina. 4 million of them in New York. Now, because of these issues around migration dynamics, it is most likely, as it is now, that a lot of African migrants would migrate to other African countries in the context of African single market. Hence the powerful point the chief economist was making about the importance of the free trade area. And so, for us, if this demographic dividend is not to disappear, we have to invest within our countries and also within the region. Now, just for somebody who is not from the field, I just have an offer, a thought here. One thing the Asians have done, Professor, is that they have not targeted so much input into the education system. You know, gross enrollment. It is about learning outcomes all the time. They target learning outcomes. So, for example, if kids leave secondary school, they say don't have what it takes. That education continues even at work. And so I think where we can make a big impact on our education systems is to leverage digital. We never have enough teachers, but digital is available for all of us. Number two, target outcomes so that the kids coming out of the education systems are able to take advantage of this dividend. But I agree with you, Professor. I think we have talked about these things far too much. We know what to do. We know what has to be done. And I think it is time just to get around and do it. That's what makes me optimistic.
when you have a panel with a bunch of professors and PhDs, you learn a lot. It's like going to school. Mr. Sadie, I'm going to give you the last word.
Thank you. So I am a development professional. I've been for a number of decades. I cannot afford to be pessimistic, particularly when I think about what is at stake and the prospects that I also see in where we're going. So we just need to make sure to watch that dependency ratio as we think about whether you want to leverage that demographic dividend. When I think about the availability of job platforms, the matching platforms that enables that potential to be leveraged. When I think about the prospects of the free trade agreement with roughly about 15 or 20% of intertrade, and just that gap that needs to be filled. When I think about, we were together at the Mo Ibrahim Summit governance when we read that report that was just giving a lot of information about our countries, with 6 of them being among the top, looking at the top 10, 6 of them being among the fastest growing countries, and then the growth prospects after that in the coming years. It's about leveraging those potentials and advocating and working hard to make sure that those potentials are there. And perhaps I'll end with one thing that has been, and it's very dear to my heart, and I think that we don't talk enough about. When I think about this world where, as we engage with our respective countries with the reduced fiscal space, there's a lot of conversation about just going back and asking for more money. And I think that that journey for self-reliance is important. And one of those, when I look at our debt situation, which makes it extremely difficult to put anything aside in order to leverage those potentials I'm talking about. And in that report, I remember talking about the total debt of Sub-Saharan Africa being equivalent to what you have in just one country in Europe, which is Belgium. And then when you think about our countries in general, if your debt to GDP ratio is going north of about 60%, alarm bells start coming. And there are countries like Japan where it's over 200%, but never make the headlines simply because of their ability to go and finance themselves. And what I'm getting at is really the advocacy needed to really put the credit rating agencies at task. Yes, it is set by the market in terms of debt, but if you look at disproportionately, that is something that is coming over and over again, where you go into debt restructuring and know that the next restructuring is just 4 years away. So this is an issue that also needs to be looked into. So in other words, my whole value proposition here is that there are things that gives us the potential to leverage in order to make that optimism a reality. Thank you.
Let's leverage the potential to achieve the qualified optimism of Professor Mkenda. Please join me in thanking this wonderful panelists.
Can we give a bigger round of applause, distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen? Thank you so much, Mr. Solomon. As he had mentioned earlier, Solomon is Dean and Professor at the University of Virginia, Frank Burton School of Leadership and Public Policy. Thank you so much for that powerful moderation. Distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen, we are now going on to the next session where we're going to learn about connection between people and infrastructure and better human capital outcomes. Allow me now to bring to the podium Diébedo Francis Kéré, founder of Kéré Architecture and the Kéré Foundation, who is also a Pritzker Prize winner in the architecture for the year 2022. As he comes to the stage, can we put our hands together? He's here. Karibu sana.
Good morning. Good morning. Your Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, this is my very first time to speak in front of an African minister. So, but now we have many of them here. So, please, if I am not too respectful, apologize myself. But I can tell you, I even spoke inside the Vatican. Yes, I did it. And so I'm standing in front of you with mixed feelings. I am home, but I don't know if, I will be respectful enough. So we have some problems with the clicker. We have heard today that in less than 3 decades, our continent will see his population double. Less than 30 years. Actually, already now, our leaders are struggling to find infrastructure. Okay. So struggling to create infrastructures. And therefore, they're looking for partners. So in search of partners, they're working with everybody. You know this picture. So, and there is a debate. Who is the right partner for our continent? Who is the ideal partner? So I don't want to waste time with that. It appears, according to discussion, that China is too present in our continent, dominant. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm not qualified to discuss about who is the best partner. I just want to say thank you to the World Bank to having given me this opportunity to talk to you. And thank to all those that get me here. So I was born in this village, Gando, Burkina Faso. It's a poor village. And I grew up with that kind of architecture. And I went to school. This is my classroom. I sat with more than 150 other kids, and it was very hot. And there was no light inside while we had the sunlight. You understand, growing in a place like this, you as a kids always have the dream to make things better. So it doesn't took me long, thanks to this school, that I grabbed a scholarship to go to Germany to study. It was great that the German government gave me this opportunity. I started and I found Germany was a paradise. So I decided to do my high school degree when I was 30 years old. I did it and I started to study architecture. And, after 2 years, I had the feeling I had enough. I was good. So I wanted to go back home and create a school in my village. So I went back home to create the primary school of Gando. I told to my people, if you want to create something that is good for us, is to use the material we know the best, which is clay. And I convinced, let me say, I happened to convince my community to help build the school. And so we did it. So even older men, our older men, they are great and we don't let them work, but they was helping me. The women for sure. What I applied was a technology. I was using clay, the same clay that my people knew. I added cement to create bricks that look like you can see. And we built this school out of mat, rebars, and metal sheet as a roofing. Inside, I create the ceiling. All material from 100 meters. From 100 meters from the side. I applied even so-called primitive techniques in the classroom. And I get the community work. Someone said here today is the minister from Ghana about great things about the women. This is true. If the women stand behind you, you will always succeed. So the women in Gando helped create a clay floor. It helped us save money. But what I was doing is to try to get people touch the material, even techniques, to create a simple wall using the same bricks. And I will jump on the top of every single mock-up to show to my people, guys, it is working. And so people trust in techniques. And so we could build, we keep building, creating shapes of building inside, looking good for the people and creating comfort for the kids. It doesn't take long. People realized what we was doing was something unique. And so they approached me to ask if I can help them do their project. So while doing the project, we still need infrastructures in Gando. Here, a library. So I'm looking always for alternative in the continent. Here, clay pots that I will use to create openings, for ventilation and light inside a library. Kids can sit there and use books in a very safe environment. Teachers has their little corner. So this is my village today. It's still growing. You have to know that I was raising the fund to do it at the beginning. Now I can work somewhere else and bring the money. What I don't have is time to invest anymore in the village. Money is not a big issue. And so left, you see the primary school where it's already green. And then lower, you see there is a high school that I'm still building. And you see what I'm doing as an effort to create greenery, create an oasis, planting trees. It's not just building, it's creating a place that are comfortable for kids to stay. I'm planting trees, the way you can see, and then I'm trying to save what nature is giving to us because we are almost at the middle of the desert. And so other people then push me, asking me to do their project. And every time I have time, I'll go to do. Here, a little example. In this project, we started with the high school degree, high school building, and now it has become a campus, a BIT, they call it, Burkina Institute of Technology. Of course, learning from the US. Why not? But then, build with material from Burkina Faso. Look at laterite. This is the way we extract it. A naturally available material, but rejected sometimes because we don't know how to improve it. And I'm using it. We cut it to make it look modern, but it's regular. And then with my team, we decided to use available wood to create a facade. Let's call it brise soleil, creating a shape that will protect the buildings against heat. And so women will be here. It's not anymore Gando. At the beginning, people were saying it is because it is a community. This place, Kudugu, is about 300 kilometers far from my village. But look at same picture. Getting people to touch the material, to put hand, to create the structure. And again, women on the construction site. They will use the wood to create facade, and the leftover will be used by myself and my team to create chairs and benches. No plastic, no plastic. And kids will be sitting and getting education, and so is the shape of the high school, made by laterite, creating a courtyard, a safe courtyard where the kids could stay and learn. Light classrooms where the kids will be happy to learn. Or for the BIT, for the university, you have a shape that protects against overheating, but then you have a courtyard where the kids can perform, can stay, protected against dust, and every other thing that can be negative. And so this is this campus. So honestly to you guys, ladies and gentlemen, if I'm looking back to that, I feel that I'm creating, or let me say I'm putting light in places where there was no opportunities. This is my work. And because I had a chance to do, and if Africa is not giving me a job, what I do to warm up, I go to the US. I see a lot of material. Here, a pavilion in Montana, very cold, and in a rich nation, one of the dominating nations. And your brother, me, Francis, went there to create a little pavilion using what is available and the technology and the money to create a structure that is capable to stay a hot summer, but also the winter. You know, it's not just mud. It is to show you that looking what is available, you could use it to shape people's dreams. Here, this pavilion serves as a concert for the visitors, but also a place to relax. And it's not just in the US. Very quickly showing you what I was able to do using also technology, knowledge and money in London. Just those projects allowed me to earn money and to go back to Gando and keep building. That's why I'm showing you them. So Serpentine Pavilion in Kensington Garden, it is the highly great place in London. Your brother was able to create this structure there because he is privileged. Because he's privileged like all of you here, I have the chance to attend education and then to use it because people gave me opportunities to do so. And my heart is with you guys, taking decision to shape, the future of our continent. I'm always, if I have time, I come back. Here an example, a clinic in Lewo, Burkina Faso, that I just built using clay bricks and human capacity that I have been training myself since I was a student. To create a clinic out of mud, which is so clean, and believe me, in this clinic, even group of people that normally will not go to the hospital, if you go there, you will see them queuing to go to visit a doctor. Maybe because of the building, maybe because of the quality of the building, maybe because we did it ourselves. I don't know. But however, in every of these projects, I'm integrating little ideas. Here, housing for a doctor that will come to visit. I try to mimic the way people give a size to their building and build little tiny houses. So people will come, and by the way, they will look at and potentially learn from it and go to improve their own housing. And inside, you have a little, very clean room where you even have a toilet. Brothers and sisters, friends from around the world, in a rural area, if you have a house and there is inside a toilet, it is a great luxury. And that's what I'm able to do in the rural area. And now I'm being called to even be involved in buildings that represent the pride of nations. Here, for example, the Parliament House of Benin, where I'm learning from nature, applying traditions in Africa, l'arbre à palabre, the palaver tree, where we sit together to talk. Learning from that, I'm creating a huge Parliament House, which is now under construction. So, ladies and gentlemen, the first building that I built as a student, has been selected 2 years ago as the 21 building, most relevant building in the world since since the Second World War. One of 21. One of those buildings is the Sydney Opera that you know. My building cost that time less than $50,000 22 years ago. And the Sydney Opera cost more than 150 million. It took me 6 months with my people to build the school in Gando. And the Sydney Opera took more than a decade. Africa is rich, ladies and gentlemen. So you may say, okay, I must be proud. Of course, I do. But what I want to tell you, it's the fact that my work has this big recognition is giving me the courage to talk to you. And to say, I fought to create my work. And you may consider it as a little drop of water in the desert, in the face of what our continent needs. I may agree with you, but I'm telling you, if you take decision which allow that kind of initiative, project to happen, you will create a lot of drops of water that even will be able to transform a desert in a rainforest. So I want to tell you, it depends on you to support that kind of initiative. If you do so, you will contribute to develop wealth in Africa, and so to contribute to develop the wealth in the world, because we depend on each other. Thank you very much. Yes, Africa can.
Distinguished delegates, a bigger round of applause. And just to add up a little bit on his profile, he is recognized globally for his pioneering approach to designs and sustainable modes of construction. His vocation to become an architect comes from a personal commitment to serve the community where he grew up, as we've seen on his presentation. And he believes in the transformative potential of beauty, looking onto what surrounds you, looking onto what you have. Just as when I look at everyone here, I see how bright the future of Africa is. So let's give ourselves a bigger round of applause. Thank you very much. So we're going now on to a session that is going to look onto the skills for the jobs of the future. Skills for the job of the future. And to moderate this plenary, distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen, allow me to invite to the stage, he's already on the stage, so please come to the stage, Mr. Sam Nganga, a bigger round of applause, karibu sana. And he will also introduce his panel. Karibu Sam, thank you so much. So as the stage is putting up the additional chair, Sam will be introducing the panelists, but as I would also like to say a word about him, Sam is an upstream manager for manufacturing, agribusiness and services at the International Finance Corporation, the private sector investment arm of the World Bank Group. Over to you, Sam. Asante sana.
Thank you very much, and I am aware that we are running a little bit behind time, so the private sector is renowned for being efficient, so we will try to be efficient. We have quite an impressive panel with us today, and I'll call them up, and hopefully they'll quickly come up to stage. First, we have two representatives from the governments of Egypt and the government of Algeria, who will give us a perspective from the policy side on how to get skills and reskilling for jobs of the future. So if I could invite the Honorable Reda Hegazi, Minister of Education and Technical Education from the government of Egypt. Please give him a hand. Okay, thank you. And then I'd like to invite the Minister Yassine Walid from the government of Algeria, where he's the Minister for Startups and Micro-Enterprises. Excellent. And then I'd like to invite Ms. Claude Bonner, who is the Managing Director and Chief Investment Officer for Seme City Development Agency in Benin. We have quite a good representation from across the continent. Welcome, Claude. And Mr. Peter Materu, who is the Chief Program Officer for MasterCard Foundation. And I believe I see him coming up. Welcome, Peter. From Ethiopia, we have Ms. Samrawit Fikru, who is the CEO of Ride Ethiopia, a ride-hailing business in Ethiopia. Welcome, Samrawit. And from Kenya, Mr. J. Michoma, HR Director from Avenue Healthcare. And finally, and definitely not least, representing Tanzania is Mr. Benjamin Fernandez, who is the founder and CEO of Nala Money, one of the biggest fintech businesses, he told me, in Africa, so in Tanzania and in Africa. So we're going to try and run through this as efficiently as we can. And the purpose of this panel is to explore how do you translate all these issues we've been talking about, human capital development, into the people that actually do the work, right? So you have students who are in the education system and who will soon be making their way into the workplace. You have adults who are already in the workplace, and how do we respond to the changes that we're seeing as a result of new technologies, as a result of machine learning, as a result of artificial intelligence. As the architect who was just up here said, Africa is rich. Africa is rich in human capital, but we need to channel that human capital into actual results in the workplace and in jobs. So that is our task. We have a few minutes, so we'll try and run very quickly. I hope everybody has got a mic. And Minister Wasini, if I may start with you, actually, if that is okay. The question we would like you to address is, from where you sit, and I should have mentioned that you're both a representative of a government, but also in your individual capacity, you've been a founder in the tech space, so this is an area that is very familiar to you. But from where you sit, how do you see the private sector ensuring that we're developing the right skills for employability across Africa?
Thank you for the question. Let me start by giving you a small overview of the education system in Algeria and the training sector in general. In Algeria, we have more than 12 million people between the primary and the secondary schools, 1.5 million students in the universities, and we have 250,000 new graduates every year. In total, we have more than a third of the Algerian population which is currently in the school. So Algeria has been investing a lot in its education system since its independence. And just to give you an idea of the amount of investment that has been done, back in 1962, after the Algerian independence, there were only 500 students in the universities in Algeria. Today, there are more than 1,500,000 students, and in totally free educational system, which is today investing more in high quality education, but also in the new technological trends. Very recently, we launched a artificial intelligence school, a nanotechnology school, and hopefully the Algerian universities will be providing for the labor sector in Algeria qualified, high-skilled engineers for the next challenges our economy will be facing. Algeria, since the last 3 years, has been also implementing public policies aimed at building in a knowledge-based economy. We have some KPIs, some key performance indicators. I think the most important one is to raise the investment in research and development to reach 3% of the GDP by 2013. Currently, it's about 1%. We want also companies to invest more in hiring highly skilled personnel, researchers, engineers. We are doing great efforts in terms of tax incentives to encourage companies to hire highly skilled people to work more with the university. And speaking about the university, our university is now much and more connected to the economy by creating incubators inside the economy for startups, by also having a program of doctorate inside the business, inside the companies, and also by promoting the training in the entrepreneurship and programming. And there are maybe two things I wanted to point out, which in my opinion are very important to consider in a very in a quickly changing world, and regarding to the new technological trends we'll be facing in the few years with generative AI, unfortunately removing some jobs, but also creating new opportunities for people. One of them is to promote the teaching of programming languages in schools. You know, if we go back 2 centuries before, we will find out that the chemistry and physics have been introduced in the school books to better address the needs of the first industrial revolution. Today we are facing a new revolution, and we need to adapt our training programs or school books to adapt to this new reality. And this can be done, of course, by teaching programming languages. We starting doing this in Algeria, and the results are quite interesting, because we discovered that it not only gives a lot of opportunities to kids to learn things that are quite new for the schools, but it also improves in a very good way their ability to resolve complex problems by breaking them down into some small, more addressable problems. It's also helped them to have a critical thinking, and it improves their mathematic capabilities. So I think one of the next challenges we'll be facing is to adapt the education system to address in a better way the needs of the technology. The second thing I think which is also important to address is the entrepreneurial spirit inside the educational system. In Algeria, we have something around 25 new company registration per 1,000 capita, which is the average also in Africa, and we need to increase the entrepreneurial spirit inside the universities and inside the population. And we started with the Higher Education Ministry in Algeria inside the universities to create what we call the entrepreneurial development centers to teach the entrepreneurial skills, management, marketing, design thinking to students. And the results are also quite interesting, because we managed to almost double the entrepreneurial will inside the university. So to address, I think the next challenges regarding to the economy, but also the technological development of Africa. I think those two topics are important to consider. The digital technological skills and also the entrepreneurial skills. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And I think that covers quite a lot of the opportunities. If I may go to you, Professor Hegazi, and just I think you're going to speak in Arabic, so there will be translation. So if you have a headset, please, you might need to use it now. But Professor Hegazi, on the policy side, on the government side, what are the steps that governments are and should be taking to help set up the right policy so that we can narrow the gaps between the employment requirements and the skills that we need to be developing?
شكرا سيدي. أولا أنا سعيد أن أنا موجود النهاردة. بشكر زملائي على المنصة، السادة الحضور، ودولة تنزانيا على حسن الضيافة اللي احنا وجدناها، والسيادة السفير. لكن أنا عايز أقول لحضرتك وزارة التربية والتعليم في مصر، بما أن وزير التربية والتعليم عندنا 25 مليون طالب في مصر، 25 million students in Egypt، و2 مليون معلم وإداري، 2 مليون معلم. فده بيدي مسؤولية كبيرة جدا على الوزير المسؤول. في 2018 السيد الرئيس أطلق استراتيجية بناء الإنسان المصري، وكان الأساس فيها أن الطلاب يتعلموا تعلم جيد حقيقي، وليس الحصول على درجات، لأن في ضوء الثورات الصناعية والتحول الرقمي لم تعد الحصول على المعلومة فقط هو الأساس، ولكن لابد من أن أنت تمتلك مهارات التواصل واللايف لونج ليرنينج، التعلم مدى الحياة، ومهارات التفكير المختلف. فعشان كده كان لازم الدولة المصرية حريصة برضو عن، أكيد عندنا تحديات زي أي دولة موجودة في أفريقيا، عجز المعلمين وكثافات الفصول. فكان من هنا الدولة المصرية حريصة على ذلك، ففي تعيين 150 ألف معلم ولهم آلية لانتقائهم، لأن أنت محتاج معلم قادر على التعليم والتدريس في عصر التحول الرقمي، مختلف خالص، مش دوره ملقن ولكن دوره أوركسترا لعملية التعلم. تاني حاجة بناء عدد من الفصول 118 و500 ألف فصل بتكلفة 39 مليار جنيه. ده واحد عشان نسد الكثافات اللي موجود. ولكن دعني أدخل على السؤال بشكل مباشر. بناء الإنسان المصري لابد، ورأس المال البشري معروفة في العالم كله أن الإنسان هو اللي بيصنع التغيير، وهو اللي بيصنع التقدم، وهو اللي بيصنع، وهو له دور في الاقتصاد كمان. فعلشان كده بدأت رحلة بناء الإنسان المصري. وهنا لازم أتكلم عن 3 حاجات سريعا: موضوع المناهج، وموضوع أسلوب تقييم الطلاب، وموضوع مدارس التكنولوجيا التطبيقية. وده واحد من الحاجات اللي بيؤهل مباشرة لسوق العمل، وسوف أختصر يعني. والاهتمام بالموهوبين والمتفوقين علميا، لأن هم اللي هيصنعوا الفارق، وما يعرف بمدارس ستيم سكول أو المتفوقين في العلوم والرياضيات والتكنولوجيا. أنا الحقيقة بهذا الصدد لابد أن أنا أتوجه بالشكر للبنك الدولي. البنك الدولي بيشتغل مع مصر في مشروع كبير جدا، المشروع اللي هو إصلاح التعليم في مصر. وما عادش بقى مجرد ده بقى فيه ريسورسز ومنتج موجود على الأرض، بقى فيه مناهج موجودة.
Thank you.
لا أنا لسه.
Yeah.
2 minutes.
Yes.
أوكي. مناهج موجودة مصرية بخبرات دولية عالمية، مبنية في 4 سيمز. السيم الأول: من أنا، كيف يعمل العالم من حولي، إلى التواصل مع العالم، وتعلم لتعرف، تعلم لتعمل، تعلم لتكون، تعلم لتتعايش مع الآخرين. ده المنهج، لأن نواتج التعلم اختلفت، فلا بد ان احنا نصوغ نواتج تعلم مختلفة بتركز اكتر على بناء الشخصية وعلى التفكير. الجزء ده كان بيتم مع مركز تطوير المناهج وبناء قدرات المركز. الاوبن بوك اكزام والتركيز على نواتج التعلم العليا والفهم العميق والتطبيق العميق، وان يبقى عندك بنك اسئله تسحب منه الاسئله، تقدر تعمل صور اختباريه من عده لامتحان واحد. النقطة الأخيرة اللي هأكد عليها علشان أنا شايف الوقت، اللي هو الأبلايد تكنولوجي أو المدارس التكنولوجيا التطبيقية. ده واحد من المدارس اللي مع رجال الصناعة ورجال الأعمال بدأ يبقى لازم الطالب يتعلم في المصنع، والتعليم المزدوج. لو كونه يروح للمصنع هيمتلك المهارة اللي موجودة. وعلشان كده الدولة المصرية حريصة على إشراك الرجال الأعمال والقطاع الخاص في مجال التعليم الفني والمدارس التكنولوجيا التطبيقية، اللي أنا ممكن في وقت تاني أتكلم عنها بالتفصيل، لأن هذا النموذج الحقيقة خرج طلبة مطلوبين في سوق العمل خارج مصر، وحتى كمان الشركات والمصانع اللي بتشترك معانا هي بتطلب بيشتغلوا ولادها. فالطالب هنا ضمن سوق العمل انه هيشتغل، ضمن انه ممكن يلتحق بالجامعات التكنولوجية مباشرة، فبقت الصورة الذهنية للتعليم الفني اعلى كتير. ده بالنسبة للتعليم التكنولوجيا التطبيقية. أما مدارس ستيم هو الطلاب الفائقين في العلوم في الصف الثالث الإعدادي بيتعمل لهم اختبار قدرات واختبار ذكاء واختبارات استعدادات، ثم يلتحقوا بمدارس بتعلمهم بقى الكابستون والمشروعات الكبرى، وإزاي يضعوا حلول للتحديات الجراند تشالنجز أو التحديات الكبرى اللي بتقابل الدولة المصرية. وعايز أقول لكم إنه هؤلاء الولاد بيحققوا يعني بيحققوا إنجاز عالي جدا سواء داخل مصر أو خارج مصر، لأن كتير من الدول العربية والدول الأجنبية بتطلبهم في منح. ده الحقيقة برضو أكاديمية للتدريب لازم يبقى، أو إنشاء الأكاديمية الوطنية للتدريب، لأنه واحد من الحاجات إن أنت لازم تعد الشباب لممارسة أولا الاشتراك في الإصلاح الإداري، الاثنين الشباب يشتركوا في العمل السياسي. فده جزء مهم. الأخطر بقى وهو عندنا الحماية بقى، أن قلنا تعليم، صحة، وحماية اجتماعية. فبس التعليم هو في لب القضية وهو في وسطها، فبما أن أنا مسؤول عن التعليم في مصر فبتكلم عن التعليم إن شاء الله. شكرا جزيلا لي.
Thank you, and sorry we didn't have enough time to go deeper into that. And maybe Peter, this is a good time to bring you in. If you have any reflections on those two questions, or how educational institutions can also play a role, over to you. Do you have a mic, Peter? Yeah, there we go. Oh.
All right. So thank you very much, and a big thank you to the World Bank for inviting us to be part of this conversation. The Mastercard Foundation is really about human capital development. We are a very young foundation, established 2006 with two purposes. One is about education and skilling for young people, and the other one is financial inclusion for the poor. But when you take it together, it's really about human capital development. So the subject of this conversation is very much in the right and center of what we do. And since 5 years, we made a decision to focus primarily on Africa, young people in Africa. And it's about enabling young people not only to access education and skilling, but it is about taking them all the way and also to access dignified and fulfilling work. And we set a target of 30 million young people in dignified and fulfilling work. So it's what we are doing, and right now we are working on this strategy to try and deliver that. Now, coming back to your question, really the disconnect that we are seeing between skilling or education and employment is driven by a number of things. The first one is just the numbers themselves. You know, the numbers, because of the success in education, the numbers of young people that are coming out of the school system are so many more than the opportunities available. And so even if we had the best education systems, there still wouldn't be enough opportunities for every young person to get into a dignified and fulfilling job. And that's why one of the things that we are prioritizing at the Mastercard Foundation is really empowering young people to create their own opportunities through entrepreneurship, but also accompanying them to grow beyond the startup level. That is one. The second one is information gap. What we are finding in a number of countries where we work is that sometimes opportunities are available and there are talented young people, but the link between the employer knowing where the talent is, and the talented young person knowing where employment is, especially for young people who come from poor families, who don't have the networks, who don't have fathers and mothers like those of us sitting here. They do not have those networks to enable them to know. And so bridging that information gap, linking young people, active programs to link young people to opportunities are important. In the Mastercard Foundation, we are working on that through internship support as one of them, but also apprenticeships and similar programs. We work with partners across the continent to connect young people to opportunities using various methods. The third one is really something around what has been mentioned here by colleagues. The two ministers mentioned them, the fact that we need to constantly evolve our education systems to match the changing needs in the labor market. I think this is something that countries are managing fairly well, I must say, and this is an area that really we just need to continue, especially because today the evolution of knowledge and technology is so much more rapid that it's not possible to wait 10 years, 15 years before you have a look at the curriculum. It's a continuous process, and I'm glad to see various countries in this process of transforming their education systems. Now, let me also make one point. You know, there is a stock and flow issue here. The stock issue, meaning the young people who have already finished school and they're out there looking, and there the task is more about enabling them to make that last hop into employment, or either self-employment or wage employment. And there are a number of things that we've seen that work quite well, which is kind of like the finishing schools model that India used some time back. Taking young people who have finished university or TVETs and then enabling them to up their skills, but in a targeted manner so that when they leave, they are going to transition successfully. We've been working with the Africa Leadership Group through their new program, they call it ALX, where they take young people who have finished university degrees, give them anywhere from 6 to 12 months of upskilling, but working very closely with employers, and then connect them to either to get into wage employment or entrepreneurship. And so far, about 500,000 people have benefited from that, and 80,000 of them have transitioned successfully into work, and the other 500, some are still in the process. But the point is short, sharp, targeted programs to take graduates who have completed schools and transition them into work. Now, the other part of the story is the flow, that looking at our education systems and doing things that can really help to get it right, meaning to get young people completing and transitioning successfully. And the minister talked about some of this, which is about career guidance and counseling. It's about internships, about entrepreneurship training. It's about, I'm going to mention one thing here, leadership development. It's so important because of this rapid evolution of knowledge and expertise and technology. It's so important that people learn to become self-paced learners. And for that to happen, they need that discipline of learning, that's one, and leading self, leading others. Certainly, they need to be digitally literate as they leave the institution so that they can benefit from the opportunities which are out there. So things that we can do while they're in school so that they're better ready. And at the Mastercard Foundation, we have the Mastercard Foundation Scholars Program, which is really aiming to create this new generation of young people who are transformative over time. And these are some of the things that we are embedding into the program, working with the institutions where these young people go, so that over time they can emerge successfully. And we are seeing that beginning to happen. So I will stop there for now. Thank you.
No, that's very. Thank you very much, Peter. And I'd actually like to take the opportunity to shift to somebody who's an example of what you've talked about, creating jobs for themselves and creating jobs for others. And Samrawit, if you could tell us a bit about your experience and how the private sector is approaching this issue of skills. And perhaps you could start by how many people have been employed by your business.
Thank you, Sam, for the question. So when we start RIDE, by the way, RIDE is the first transport technology for Ethiopia, which is the capital city of Africa. When we start the technology, we approach to the drivers. And we have technology to connect you with the passengers. They said, why do you need your technology while I have my own clients, my own passengers? And that's where we said, okay, we have to change our language to their level. We have to see how they're approaching a new technology and new ideas. We have to go and spend time with them. Then we start to have our day with them, spending our day with them, how they communicate with each other, how they learn from their peers, and so that we customize our training to their level, so that they can understand what the technology will provide them. Then after doing that, we customized our training to their level and select the first adapters, and we gave them a title called Ride Ambassadors. Those ambassadors know how to communicate with their peers, to show them how the technology works, how it can increase the way of gaining more trips per day. We were like asking them, how many trips are you guys doing per day? They said 2 or 3. I'm enough. I'm gonna say thank you to God and sleep. And we said, but through the technology you can get 12 to 14 trips a day. They said, no, we have clients, I don't need. But those ambassadors, who's the early adapter for the technology, they start to pitch them. They start to show them how their life is changing. Some of the ambassadors, they were like telling them, look how I look today. I'm dressing well, I'm neat, my car is neat. I have changed my car from the old car to the new one. And also, I bought a washing machine for my wife. And this kind of experience, they start to somehow, I have to also have the technology and the way of my living. I have to change the way of my living, my family, and I have to take my kids to a better school. So after doing that, we started our own training center where they can get training like time management, money management, customer handling, cleanliness. We start to give them. After a while, we closed our training center because their peers start to pitch the idea, how they have to live, how to save the money, how to manage the customer, how to manage their money as well. So after a while, the technology become a normal, common technology for them. Now we have 73,000 drivers in the capital city of Africa, Addis Ababa. We have created for 73,000 youngsters in Addis Ababa. So we didn't ask them. I mean, we didn't somehow. We start to pitch our idea with high-level business ideas, but it didn't work for us. We go down to their level, customize our training, and pitch our idea. They start to accept it. They start to give us their trust. So that's how we did the training. Thank you.
I don't know whether everybody got that number, 73,000. So I think that deserves a round of applause. Thank you very much, Samrawit. So let's switch to Benin, where I believe you're trying to develop many people who are starting their own businesses or are ready to work in the new environment. So perhaps you can, Claude, you can tell us about Semesiti and your approach to this skills issue. Is that working?
Hello?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you. And I'm very grateful to actually have the opportunity to be here and talk about what we do in Benin in front of this assembly. So thank you for having me here. So Semesiti is an initiative that is one of the flagship initiatives of the Beninese government. And our aim is really to equip our young ones with the skills to succeed in fast-changing environment. So we do that by building programs, academic programs, entrepreneurship programs, research programs. Really the aim is that by doing this, by bringing them together, the entrepreneurs, the students, the researchers, we can accelerate growth and their contribution to the economy. So in terms of skills, and I'm super happy to be talking about reskilling jobs for jobs of the future. There are three main things that we have to keep in mind. The first one is jobs for the future. It's a very tricky one because we don't even know what those jobs are going to be. We kind of know what the skills are necessary, but it's an exercise to start thinking about which jobs are still going to be existing in a few years, which ones are not. So it's really best to start thinking about the abilities that our young ones need to have to be successful in a future work environment. And by doing this, you have to humble yourself because you can't be doing this behind your desk. You really have to go out there. You have to talk to the private sector. You have to talk to the government, understanding what their plans are, where the economy is going. You also have to go outside of your country and talk to experts and say, okay, you've done this, it worked. Is there any way we can adapt this and not having to reinvent the wheel? So it really takes a global village to understand what the future of work is going to be and then decide what are the skills, how are we going to train our young ones to be able to succeed in that environment. The second thing is, yes, we can do all the technical training and ensure that they have, the right skills in artificial intelligence and data science, etc. But actually, that's not going to be enough. The reason why it's not enough is because we're in an extremely complex environment. And you have to train them to be comfortable with chaos. And to be comfortable with chaos, they need to be confident. They need to be critical thinkers. They need to come up with solutions. And all these things are called soft skills. And that's one thing that you find throughout all our programs. Yes, we train them in technical skills, but we also ensure that they have the soft skills to be able to succeed in an environment that they don't even know what it's going to be. When you hire someone today and you give them a job description, you really know that in that job description, half of what's written there, they're not going to do, and the other half, you don't even know what it is. And so you're looking at the person you want to hire saying, okay, if that changes tomorrow, if there is a new challenge that's thrown their way, are they going to be okay? And this is why we need to train our young ones to be super comfortable with change, super comfortable with chaos, be resilient, be critical thinkers, always challenge the existing, because this is our complex world. This is what it is, and this is what they need to succeed. And then the third one, I think all of the other panelists have talked about, is the entrepreneurial skills. We know very well that the government is not going to hire all the people that we train. The private sector is not well developed to also absorb all that increasing number of talent that we want to put in the job market. So we have to train them to create jobs for themselves and for thousands of others, as we just heard. And this is something that in most programs that we see, we talk about TVET, vocational training, but very few do you see the link between education and entrepreneurship. And it's so important. This is something that really needs to start even at high school level. We have to train our young ones to have an entrepreneurial mindset. Even if they end up working for the private sector or the public sector, they go out there and they're entrepreneurs because they're coming up with new solutions all the time. And so one of the things that we do is from the very beginning of our programs, we ensure that they all work on projects. So our programs are project-based. They are peer-to-peer learnings. And that gives them the ability to be confident carrying a project from beginning to end, but also understand what are the difficulties of finding financing, finding resources. These are all the things that an entrepreneur does. And an entrepreneur is not afraid, a high-growth entrepreneur is not afraid to tackle these issues because they have been trained for that. So if I summarize in terms of skill set, so first of all, it takes a global village. You need to have that ecosystem mentality when you're looking at jobs for the future. Second of all, you have to think about more than technical skills, but soft skills as well. And then you have to ensure that systematically entrepreneurial skills are in your programs, in the way you're training young ones, so that they're able to be themselves job creators.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, Claude. I have to say I have not heard the expression being comfortable with chaos before, so I agree that's a really important thing, because we don't really know what these jobs are going to be, so fully agree. So Jay, over to you. You're one of the people that is employing all these people that are being skilled up in the healthcare space. So you have two perspectives on this, both for the skills development, but also healthcare and delivering effective healthcare is an important part of human capital development. So it will be good to hear your views.
Thank you, Sam. And I couldn't agree more with what she has said as the person who develops job descriptions for staff. From a private sector mindset, I would say it is the same thing. We need to work with government. We need to work with ministries of education to change the curriculum or influence the changing of the curriculum, because then you are able to have a link between the output from the universities and the institutions to what you take up as an employer. But again, we cannot take each and every person who comes out of the universities. Let me talk about the number of staff we employ. I work for a healthcare company called Avenue Healthcare. We run 3 hospitals and about 17 clinics in Kenya, as well as a home care business. We have about 1,100 permanent staff and about 700 temporary staff who come and go based on their timings. Now, for the majority of the staff we hire are nurses and doctors. And naturally, our business is mostly brick and mortar currently because of culture. Culture is the doctor. I must see the doctor physically. I must go to a hospital. So currently it's brick and mortar, but the transition is happening, and it happens mostly through the middle class, because they are the first to embrace technology, to embrace telemedicine, to embrace, technology in the deployment of medicine. So the larger the middle class, the more the transition into technology. So for a skill set we are hiring for, the key thing for us is we look at the data. We look at the data of healthcare, let me call them conditions, and where the population is going. And based on that, we make decisions on what kind of skill sets we will employ, what kind of doctors. So you move from basic GP services, which is general practitioner. We go to look at things like cardiology because of healthcare lifestyles. Cardiology, things like oncology, which is about chemo and all of that. And we hire in that direction. So based on that, that is how we work with our staff to move them in that kind of direction where the market, as it were, is moving. So the skill sets we see in healthcare that are lacking are very similar to what have been mentioned. Soft skills are really missing. How to communicate, how to be a critical thinker, how to adapt. Those are critically missing, and those are things which we develop. We're looking at continuous learning. So we have in our industry, we look at CMEs, which is continuous medical education. Because people work on shift, they cannot sit in a classroom for 3 hours. You have to train them on 30-hour bits or 1-hour bits as they come in shift. So you have to adapt how you train the staff. And lastly, from my point, is to talk about innovation and research. We encourage that in our hospitals so that people can research, can look at new ways of treating people, and that research is disseminated across all our network and the private sector. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jay. And so finally, Benjamin, you have traveled this journey, you've set up a business, you've been an entrepreneur, an employer, digital space. It would be good to hear your perspective on how this goes forward in terms of closing the skills gap.
Thank you. Najua tunasubiria msosi kwa nitawaisha mambo. So, cool. My name is Benjamin. I'm from Tanzania. This is my home. So it's good to be back home. And what we do is cross-border payments between the UK, the US, Europe, and 9 African countries, including Tanzania, Kenya, Uganda, Rwanda, Ghana, Nigeria, Senegal, Cote d'Ivoire, as well as Cameroon. So we enable cross-border payments, enable people to do trade between the US, UK, and Europe, in and out of Africa. So my context is around software with upskilling. I think, and while we have a lot of government officials here, one of the things I'd love to discuss and talk about is, in many governments we talk about the importance of technology. And many events you go and hear government officials talk about the importance of technology. Yet there's a lack of action from government officials about the importance of technology. And so the way I look at this is, across the African continent, the need I would love to see more is a prioritization of software development across the continent. I think Africa has a massive opportunity, as we heard today. By 2030, more than 600 million people under the age of 30 across the continent. And that's an opportunity for us to grow our GDP in each one of our markets, because software engineers will earn a lot of money. If that money is being sent and people are being paid as software engineers across the continent, that increases the amount of spend they're going to be spending locally with hard currency, such as US dollars coming into the market to pay for talent here. In each one of our markets, Africa has the largest dollar shortage in the world. So if you look at it, many banks are looking to buy dollars. Now, people who can bring dollars in locally, apart from traders, apart from tourism maybe in Tanzania, is also software engineers. Now, if you look at the skill set directly, software engineers earn more than some politicians in the room. There are software engineers that earn more than the president of your country, my country as well. And I think that's the opportunity that we should look at, is how can we nurture the skill set in software engineering across the world, across the African continent, where Africa, because there's a lot of young talent, we can catch up as well as lead in software engineering globally. These are the things I would love to start seeing more. You know, the country that leads in Africa in software engineering is South Africa. Then you go to Nigeria, then you go to Morocco, then you go to Kenya. But there's 54 of us across the continent, 55, 56, depending on who you ask, but 54 countries at least across the continent. So what are each one of our governments doing to prioritize software engineering in each one of these markets is what I would love to see more, and I would love to see the prioritization of that. You know, if you look at the skill of software engineering, that's transferable. For example, at NALA, we employ people across 30 different countries. The UK is one of our largest offices, Nairobi is one of our largest offices, but a lot of the skills that we look for around software engineering. And so how can also governments, let's say, if there aren't initiatives locally, for example, millions of people come around the world to visit Tanzania. Now, how can we make maybe Zanzibar a haven for software engineering, where people can come and work in Zanzibar as maybe a digital nomad, but also train and develop skills locally in markets where you can upskill significant quality of people by bridging the gap in software engineering right there. So people can learn from people who work at Facebook, at Google, at Instagram, at Meta, you know, all these different organizations around the world, sitting right next to them, right next to each other. And so I think when you can bring people in the market like that, it raises the bar of quality for software engineering across the whole continent, and that's the opportunity we as a continent have. And finally, you know, to all the government officials in the room, I think it's a responsibility on each one of you. I know we all like talking about technology, and some of us fear technology. I don't think we should fear technology. I think technology is a place for us to lean in and step into. I always tell this to my team. I say, look, if we don't take responsibility, we take orders. And I think that's a principle of life. So if government officials, if we don't take responsibility in each one of our functions as we're building our governments up, we will take orders when technology starts to lead us. Thank you.
And I think that's a good place to wrap it up. I think we are at the top of our time. We could have gone on for a while, but we've run out of time. So let me thank the panel, and please join me in thanking the panel for all their contributions. And Master of Ceremonies, back to you.
So another bigger round of applause, distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you so much, Sam, and the wonderful panelists for that powerful contribution. We are now going to break for lunch. We have a lot to digest. Since morning, we've been getting stuff into our heads and mind and hearts. Now let's spend at least an hour to digest onto what has transpired. Quick note, ministers, ambassadors and high commissioners, as well as the permanent secretaries, will have their lunch on the 3rd floor, Kilimanjaro Hall. It's easier to access the hall through these two doors on the right. You go to the 3rd floor. This is where lunch is served for you. The rest of us, lunch is served at the tent outside. Opposite tent and along that road outside this hall, we have exhibitors who are exhibiting products from Tanzania, made in Tanzania. Please make time to see and support vendors who are selling these products. And when we come back at exactly 2 o'clock, we shall begin with the strategy to implementation to education. So for now, allow me to wish you all a very happy lunch. Thank you all.